Hi everyone, Hortense here from Knitting with Chopsticks, my blog where I share my free knitting and crochet patterns, mostly easy patterns for beginners that are looking for like an extra challenge or like a new step for their projects. And today I want to talk to you about everything about blocking so that you can have your crochet garments look as professional as you can. So you've probably read this sentence at the bottom of a pattern, carefully block your project. And that's usually all the pattern says about blocking. I have been ignoring this sentence, or I used to ignore this sentence for about 20 years until I finally decided to look into it and see how much of a difference it makes. So I really want to try to show you guys that it's not so long. It doesn't take so much time. It's not so boring and annoying. And it does make a big difference on your project. Let's go over what I'm going to talk about. So first, what is blocking? Why you should block your projects? When you should block them? What will you need to block them? And then 3 different techniques you can use to block your projects. The pros and cons of each technique. And whether or not you have to block every single project. Let me already tell you, you don't. It's up to you. But let's discuss that further down. So what is blocking? So blocking is the process that you use to make your project take its best shape. Usually it's done with the help of water or steam. And the process is exactly the same whether you're knitting or crocheting. So if you do both, easy peasy, just do the same thing. So I like to compare blocking to like hair drying, like blow drying your hair. You use heat and water to get your hair into shape, but that's not all blow drying does. It doesn't only shape your hair, it also makes it nice and smooth. It's flowier and drapier and shinier and softer. Blocking does just the same to your yarn and your project. So it's not just about getting your edges straight and your measurements right. It's also about the fabric itself. So why should you block your project? So it has a lot of advantages. First of all, it helps even your tension. So you might be like a very good crocheter and you might crochet a lot, but it's really impossible to have a perfectly even tension all the time. From one day to the other, your tension might be slightly different. If you're crocheting on the go or at home, it might be a bit different. So blocking your project will help even those irregularities out. Then it opens up any lace stitches or eyelets you have in your fabric and makes them really shine. It highlights your textures. So if you have any crochet puffs or bubbles or cables, blocking will really make them come out more. It helps with shaping your project. So blocking is the magic trick behind granny squares to make them perfectly square, or any round piece, have it perfectly flat and round. But it's the same for any piece of garment or any other project you're doing, getting it to the exact measurements you want and making sure all your edges are straight. Blocking really helps with that. So as I said, it gives shine, drape, and softness to your fabric. And depending on the yarn composition, the results can be very different. So natural fibers will take the blocking process much better than synthetics, but that doesn't mean you can't do anything for synthetics. We'll go over that a bit later, but you should still block your synthetic projects. So let me show you a short video of before after from blocking so you can have an idea of how much a difference it can make. So when should you block your project in the making process? So usually the pattern will indicate it at what stage the designer recommends to block your project. But if that's not the case, I usually like to block my projects. If they're made in one piece, I will do it at the complete end. Sometimes if you need to add a border, it's easier to block it before adding the border. It makes adding the border easier, but depends on what you need. You can always block it twice too. Block it before the border and then reblock it after the border so that your border is also blocked. And when I make garments in different pieces, I like to block each of the pieces separately before assembling them because it makes sewing much easier. So you have to look at what's working best for you and see what the designer recommends. Now, what do you need for blocking? So there's different materials that you need for the blocking process. First of all, you need blocking boards. So I like to use this type of foam boards. You can find them easily on Amazon. They're very, very easy to assemble, and they have this grid that makes laying out the pieces and making sure your edges are straight and your measurements are right, very easy. But you don't have to buy specific blocking boards. You can already start blocking your projects with whatever you have at home. So if you have a yoga mat, a mattress, a foam board, anything where you can pin your project into will work. So you don't really have to purchase anything. But make sure that it's something you don't mind getting pricked into, as it might leave traces. So I used to do it on my couch with just like a thin, packaging foam and a towel. It worked perfectly fine. So the next thing you need are the actual pins that you are going to use to pin your project down. So I like to work with these very simple T-pins. They don't rust, they keep their shape. They're very easy and cheap to get. Another option is to use what they call knit blockers, which are like these pieces that are between 2 and 6 centimeters and that have like different pins in one block. The advantage with that is that you have to place a lot of, fewer pieces to have your whole project laid out. But the end result, in the end, it's just the same. So depending on the blocking method you're going to use, there's a few other things you might need. You might need a large bucket to soak your project into, or a sink, a clean towel. Make sure you use a bath towel that you're not super fan of, because some yarns, their colors might bleed. So you might end up with stains on your towel. So just like heads up. You might need a source of steam. So you can either use a steamer or just like the steam function on your like normal iron. I use that a lot. That's like easy, so you don't need any extra material. And a spray bottle with like a mist spray, like just the one that you use for gardening, works perfectly. So now, so there are 3 main ways to block your project. First off is finger blocking, where you're just using your fingers to pull and stretch the fabric in the shape you want. So this can be good for like a last minute quick setup, but the effects don't usually last because you're not applying any water or heat. So it's not ideal. Second technique is wet blocking. So in this technique, you're gonna completely wet your project to block it. So that's the technique I use the most often. There's 2 ways to do it, either soaking or spraying. So for soaking, you're gonna soak your project in a bucket of water. I usually stick to room temperature water, so I'm making sure I don't felt or melt or any damage to my project. Also for color bleeding, room temperature is the best. You can add some gentle wood wash or blocking product. to give your project a good clean at the same time. I have allergies, so I usually avoid any kind of product, so I can't really recommend anyone specifically. But a lot of yarn brands also provide blocking soap. So you let your project soak for about 10-15 minutes. So you make sure that all your fibers are nice and soaked. I like to squish my project with my hands in the water to make sure that all the air bubbles come out and it's really getting water everywhere. So the next step is to take it out of the water and to squeeze out as much water as you can, but you shouldn't squeeze your project itself. So the way to do that is to lay it flat on a towel, and then you roll the towel and press the towel to get as much water out as possible without stretching the fabric. If you squeeze it or wrench it, you're probably going to stretch the fabric, which can damage your project. So don't do that. So once you got as much water out as possible, you lay your project flat on your blocking mat and you pin it in place. So to pin it in place, you use your T-pins on the edges and you just pin to the shape you want. Any area that has like eyelets or texture, I will add some extra pins to make sure that I open up all those lace stitches as much as possible. This is where you can like correct any like small mistakes. If you have like an edge that isn't straight or a sleeve that's like a tiny bit short, you can stretch it a little bit and things like that. But be careful not to overstretch your fabric. Depending on the yarn, when it's wet, it can be very easy to overstretch it. So make sure your edges are nice and straight and your measurements match your pattern, or you will be ending up with very long, thin fabric, which is definitely not the purpose, especially for garments. So when you have pinned it in place and you're happy with the shape, you just let it dry. You really have to let it dry completely. I know it's frustrating and you just want to take it off and wear it, but as long as it's not 100% dry, it's not finished blocking. And basically, if you take it out before it's dry, the whole process was useless. So that would be a pity. So really wait until it's completely dry, and then you can remove all the pins and enjoy your project. So let's I have a quick video of a project I blocked, like time lapse, to show you like the entire process. So that's how you wet block your project. Another technique for wet blocking, is spraying instead of soaking. So here you're gonna pin your project when it's still dry, and then you're gonna soak it with water by spraying room temperature water on it until it's completely soaked. You let it dry, and then you remove the pins. So the only difference is you pin it when it's still dry, and you make it wet once it's pinned in position. So this technique has the big advantage that because you're pinning it dry, there's less chances of overstretching the fabric, but it's going to take more time to dry because you're not soaking, you're not taking out any of the water with your towel. So that's a bit of the pro and cons here. So that's for wet blocking. And then the last main technique we have is steam blocking. So wet blocking is really good for any natural fibers, but it doesn't work well for synthetic fibers because here you need some heat to complete the blocking process so that the fibers relax and take their shape and so on. So for steam blocking, it's quite similar to the spray technique. So you're going to pin your project when it's dry to your board to the shape you want. And then instead of spraying water on your project, you're going to go over it with some steam so that you put some moisture and heat in the fibers so that they take the shape. So you can use either like a steamer, the same one you're using for your garments, your clothes, or just a steam function on your iron. So I think all irons have like a button where you can just like have some steam come out of the iron, and you just go do that all over the project. Now you have to be very careful because you're using heat, you can damage your project. So make sure you stay 5 to 10 centimeters, so 2 to 4 inches away from touching the fabric so that you don't melt or felt your project. So natural fibers can felt, meaning that like the wool is shrinking, just like if you put a wool sweater in your dryer. And synthetic fibers can melt because they're basically made out of plastic. So if you apply too much heat, the plastic is just gonna melt and basically your project's destroyed. So be careful. So once you have sprayed steam all over your project, try to be as even as possible and have the whole project have as much steam, well, equally steamed. And then you're going to let it rest and dry. So make sure all the humidity is out, just like for the other techniques. You have to make sure it's completely dried before you take out the pins. Usually in about an hour or two, it should be done. And then you can remove all the pins and enjoy your project. So steam blocking works great for all types of fabrics, but I usually am sort of lazy and don't want to take the risk to apply heat. So when I can wet block, I just do that, although I have to wait longer. So it's a bit of pros and cons and what you prefer. But steam blocking is great for last minute projects because in a couple of hours it's dry and ready to go. So let's go over quickly the pros and cons of each of the techniques, like synthesized. So we have hand blocking, wet blocking, and steam blocking. Regarding time investment, hand blocking and steam blocking are the lowest in time, like the quickest, especially hand blocking, because you don't have to wait at all. Wet blocking takes a bit more time because your project has to dry. If you use the soaking method, if you use the spraying method, it's going to take even more time to dry than if you're using the soaking method. But the end result will be awesome in both cases. So if we look at the risk to damage your project, with hand blocking, it's pretty low to destroy, like ruin your project by just stretching it by hand is really hard. Wet blocking, normally it shouldn't have much risk. If you're using the soaking method, you can always stretch your fabric, so be mindful of that. But steam blocking is definitely more risky for like felting and melting. So be really careful with that. Sometimes when you're steam blocking, there's like drops of water that can drop on your project. That water is very hot and can damage the fiber. So try to be careful. And finally, if we look at the end result, hand blocking has the most like temporary results. Wet blocking is great for natural fiber, but has low results on synthetic fibers, and steam blocking works for all types of fibers. Now, do you need to block all your projects? So that's probably the question I get the most often. I should reply yes, but let's be honest, I don't block all my projects because it takes time and energy, and sometimes I just want to start enjoying it directly. But it's never wasted, I'd say. So some types of projects are more useful to block, like it's more useful to block them than others. Like anything that's like round or like has a 3D shape is quite hard to block nicely, because if you lay a hat flat, then you have like those side sort of seams that are like flat. You could like block it on a balloon or something to block it in the actual real shape, but that starts to be more complicated. Usually amigurumi aren't blocked either because they're stuffed. So if we have a quick look at some of the projects, like some of the patterns I made that I haven't blocked, So my candy pot holder, it's all like little bowls that are stuffed. So I definitely didn't block that. My chair socks, I didn't bother blocking either. And any type of hat I make, I usually don't block. But on the other hand, some types of projects I always block. If there is any lace or open stitches, I will definitely block it. Usually garments, I block pretty much all of them. Blankets, I tend to be lazy because like my blocking mats aren't big enough. So unless I have some part that has like big texture or big lace sections, I will skip it. But it depends on the end results. If you're not sure, you can always block it. It might not make a big difference, but it's not gonna have like a negative effect. If you like it the way it is, don't bother. Go ahead and enjoy. The most important for me is that you're happy with your project. So if you think it's perfect the way it is, why not just go ahead and enjoy it? So just a few more like frequently asked questions that I get all the time. So can you block acrylic yarn? As I mentioned, acrylic is a synthetic yarn. It's not as easy to block as natural fibers, but you can get great results with steam blocking. And it will help even your tension and get the drape and flow nice and make the fabric softer and open up your lace stitches and all of that. And finally, do you need to block your project after each time you wash it? So that's a big one. You only block your project once. Of course, like the fiber has memory. So if you block it and then you try to frog it, you'll see that your yarn really has like a very spaghetti shape because the yarn has been set into that position. But when you wash it, you don't need to do the whole blocking process again. Of course, lay them flat to dry. And you can always like pin some spots if you want to be sure. But normally if you just lay it flat to dry, it should be perfectly fine. If you hang it or something like that, it's gonna stretch just due to the weight and the weight of the sweater or whatever project it is, just the same as you would for any like store-bought wool garments. I just lay them flat to dry so they don't get destroyed. So yeah, that's everything about blocking that I know. I hope you guys enjoyed and learned some new things and have a wonderful day.